The United States of America emerged from a fierce revolution in the 18th century, but its history stretches far deeper than the founding of the nation. Long before the colonies rebelled against Britain, the continent held an ancient and diverse past. It was shaped by cultures that existed centuries before Europeans arrived. In this land, communities adapted to nature and climate, forming societies that left archaeological evidence. The Mississippi culture built ceremonial mounds and urban centers, while in the Southwest, the Pueblo peoples constructed stone villages. Their lives were deeply tied to the land, reflecting respect for nature and spiritual connection. The earliest inhabitants are believed to have crossed the land bridge called Beringia, connecting Asia and North America during the Ice Age. As global temperatures rose, the glaciers melted, and the land bridge disappeared beneath rising seas. Over thousands of years, these early hunter-gatherers migrated across the continent, becoming the ancestors of Native American peoples. They developed distinct cultures, languages, and belief systems. Their stories, passed down orally, explained the origins of animals, rivers, and stars. Although many of these cultures would later be devastated, their heritage shaped the early history of the continent long before European exploration. One of the earliest known European explorers of North America was Leif Erikson, the Norse seafarer who around the 11th century was blown off course traveling to Greenland. Storms forced him westward, landing him on the shores of a place later known as Newfoundland. He and his crew established a small settlement called Vinland. However, due to isolation, hostile conditions, and lack of sustainable support, the settlement was short-lived. It eventually faded from memory until rediscovered by historians centuries later. Ericsson's brief presence showed that contact with the Americas existed long before Columbus, though it did not permanently transform the region. Centuries later, Europe depended on secure trade routes reaching India and China. Goods such as spices, silks, and precious metals moved through the Silk Road and Mediterranean networks. When Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Empire in 1453, land routes to Asia became dangerous and costly. Christopher Columbus proposed reaching Asia by sailing west. Sponsored by Isabella of Castile, he departed in 1492 with the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. Using maps by Toscanelli, he reached the Caribbean, believing he had found Asia. His voyages opened European awareness of the Western Hemisphere and changed world history. Columbus's governance of Hispaniola exposed the darker aspects of colonization. Even for his time, his treatment of the native population was brutal. Many were enslaved or killed. Eventually, accusations of cruelty caused him to be arrested and returned to Europe in chains. However, his expeditions accelerated European interest in the Americas. The most devastating impact on Native Americans was not weapons, but disease. Smallpox, influenza, and measles swept through populations who had no immunity. Historians estimate that up to 90% of native peoples perished in the following centuries, dramatically altering the human landscape of the continent. Spain expanded rapidly, colonizing the Caribbean, Florida, and Central and South America, conquering the Aztec and Inca empires. French expeditions later arrived, interested in trade and missionary work. They traveled along the St. Lawrence River and into the Great Lakes, establishing New France. The Dutch followed, building forts and trading posts along the Hudson River, creating New Netherland. Meanwhile, English settlers founded Jamestown in 1607, developing agriculture and eventually exporting tobacco. The economic opportunities of this new world attracted thousands of Europeans seeking fortune, land, or religious freedom, transforming North America into a multicultural and contested space. As Europeans began interacting with native nations, alliances and conflicts emerged. The Iroquois Confederacy, a powerful union of initially 5 nations, later 6, played an influential role. Their system of collective governance inspired later democratic concepts. They traded beaver furs with Dutch and later English merchants in exchange for firearms. These exchanges shifted balances of power among indigenous nations. Beaver populations declined, sparking warfare with tribes allied to the French. The The struggle, known as the Beaver Wars, lasted decades. The French and their allies clashed with Iroquois forces until the Great Peace of 1701 finally halted the fighting. By the mid-17th century, European powers had developed transatlantic commercial networks. Ships from Europe carried manufactured goods to Africa, exchanged them for enslaved people, and transported them to the Americas under horrific conditions. Countless people died during the Middle Passage. In the Americas, enslaved labor-powered plantations producing tobacco, sugar, cotton, and other goods, which were shipped back to Europe. This triangular trade system generated immense wealth, fueled economies, and entrenched racial slavery as a cornerstone of colonial life. The human suffering behind this economic engine left a legacy that would shape American society for centuries. By the 1750s, territorial tensions intensified as France and Britain competed for control of North America. France claimed vast interior lands, while Britain possessed the populous 13 colonies along the Atlantic coast. In 1754, the French and Indian War erupted over the Ohio River Valley. When France built forts in the area, Britain protested and sent troops. The conflict grew into the 7 Years' War, fought on multiple continents. Britain's victory transferred significant French territories to British control. Yet, war expenses left Britain deeply in debt, leading them to impose new taxes on the American colonies. The taxes, including the Sugar Act and Stamp Act, sparked outrage. Colonists argued there should be no taxation without representation. Many protested in speeches, pamphlets, and boycotts. One colonist remarked at a town meeting, "If we are loyal subjects, why are we denied a voice in Parliament?" Tension escalated, culminating in the Boston Massacre in 1770 when British soldiers fired into a crowd, killing 5. The unrest continued. In 1773, the Sons of Liberty boarded ships and dumped taxed tea into Boston Harbor. Britain responded with the Intolerable Acts, imposing direct rule and military occupation. In 1774, delegates from 12 colonies met in Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress. They drafted petitions demanding the repeal of oppressive laws. Britain refused. In April 1775, British forces marched from Boston to seize colonial weapons. Paul Revere rode into the night warning, "The British are coming." Militia members faced the British at Lexington and Concord. Shots were exchanged, and the British retreated to Boston under fire. Soon after, the Second Continental Congress formed the Continental Army and appointed George Washington as commander, transforming colonial resistance into a full-scale struggle for independence. The war intensified. In June 1775, British soldiers attacked American positions at Bunker Hill. Though the British won the ground, they suffered heavy losses. Washington arrived in Boston that July and maintained the siege through winter. When artillery arrived in March 1776, Washington positioned the cannons over the city, forcing the British to evacuate. After a year of resistance, the colonies declared their independence. On July 4, 1776, Congress approved the final text of the Declaration of Independence. The words proclaimed freedom of a new nation, though real independence would require years of conflict to achieve. The British returned with powerful naval forces, and the war raged across multiple states. The Americans struggled, suffering defeats, but the victory at Saratoga in 1777 shifted momentum. The triumph convinced France, and later Spain, to openly support the Americans. French ships, weapons, and soldiers bolstered the Continental Army. With crucial foreign assistance and strategic leadership, the Americans cornered British General Cornwallis at Yorktown. In 1781, his surrender marked the war's turning point. The Treaty of Paris in 1783 recognized the independence of the United States and granted territory east of the Mississippi River. Independence brought the challenge of building a government. The Articles of Confederation proved too weak, prompting leaders to draft a stronger system. In 1787, the U.S. Constitution was written, establishing 3 branches of government with checks and balances. It was ratified in 1788. The Bill of Rights followed, guaranteeing freedoms such as speech, assembly, and religion. George Washington was unanimously chosen as the first president in 1789. Under his leadership, the young nation began defining its identity. However, global tensions soon pulled America into diplomatic conflict, particularly with France, which felt betrayed by U.S. trade with Britain. France had supported the American Revolution but later fell into revolution itself. The United States declined to repay debts owed to the French monarchy, insisting they were owed to a regime no longer in power. France retaliated by seizing American merchant ships. The United States strengthened its navy, leading to an undeclared naval conflict known as the Quasi-War. Under President Thomas Jefferson, the nation expanded westward. In 1803, Jefferson bought the Louisiana Territory from Napoleon for $15 million, doubling the nation's size. The Lewis and Clark expedition followed, mapping lands, documenting species, and navigating relations with native nations. The War of 1812 erupted between the United States and Britain over trade restrictions and maritime rights. The British invaded and burned Washington, D.C., including the White House. The war ended with no major territorial changes, but it fostered national pride and identity. In the 1830s, President Andrew Jackson signed policies forcing native tribes from their lands. Thousands of Cherokee and other tribes were marched westward, suffering death from disease and hunger, the Trail of Tears. Meanwhile, economic and territorial growth continued, fueled by the idea of manifest destiny, the belief that America was meant to expand westward. Mexico gained independence from Spain in 1821. Its northern territories were sparsely populated, so settlers from the U.S. moved in. Cultural and political differences soon caused conflict. Texas rebelled, gained independence, and later requested U.S. statehood. After James K. Polk, a strong supporter of expansion, became president, Texas was annexed in 1845. This triggered the Mexican-American War. The U.S. victory resulted in Mexico ceding large territories, including present-day California, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and New Mexico. Soon after, news of gold in California spread, bringing hundreds of thousands of seekers and accelerating Western settlement. The expanding nation divided over slavery. Industrial northern states largely opposed it, while southern states depended on enslaved labor. The Kansas-Nebraska Act allowed settlers to vote on slavery, leading to violent conflict. Abraham Lincoln was elected president in 1860. Many in the South believed he threatened slavery, though he initially aimed only to prevent its expansion. Southern states seceded, forming the Confederacy. The Civil War began in 1861. The North had industrial strength and greater population. The South possessed experienced generals and strong resolve. The war introduced modern technologies such as railways, telegrams, and ironclad ships. After years of bloody conflict, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring enslaved people in Confederate states free. In 1863, the armies collided at Gettysburg, the war's deadliest battle. The Union victory marked a turning point. Eventually, Confederate forces weakened. On April 9, 1865, General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant. Lincoln oversaw the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery nationwide. Tragically, days later, he was assassinated while attending a theater performance. The nation entered Reconstruction, an era of rebuilding and redefining rights. But conflicts over race and citizenship would continue long into the future. In the decades ahead, the United States grew into a global power. It defeated Spain in 1898, gaining territories including Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. It oversaw the construction of the Panama Canal, linking oceans. In World War I, the U.S. joined the fight in 1917, helping end the conflict. The Roaring Twenties brought cultural and economic change, followed by the Great Depression. World War II thrust America back into global conflict, culminating in the atomic bombings of Japan. After the war, the U.S. emerged as a superpower, shaping world affairs through the Cold War, scientific advances, civil rights struggle, and modern challenges.